Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, of course, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here in Treaty 1 territory. The land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself is on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. It's always a real pleasure to welcome Jay behind the microphone. And not just a pleasure, but a genuine privilege. I have a great deal of respect for the man, as do we as an institution, not just for his work on the page, but also, and most importantly, for his work in community. And I think this turnout and all of his work is a real testament to the power of that. Tonight marks the publication of his latest book, The Transformative Power of Adult Education. We're so hugely grateful to our friends at Fernwood Publishing for the book and for making tonight possible. Following an introduction and a few words from a special guest, Jim Silver will then speak on the book. After that, as time permits, there'll be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions. So as you're listening tonight, please allow those to percolate in your head. When it comes time for the Q&A, I'll approach you in what is hopefully a non-threatening manner with this microphone, and that'll ensure that everybody watching at home can hear your question as well. I'll be back at the end to review signing procedure, but for now, here to introduce his good friend and colleague. Please join me in welcoming Acquisitions and Development Editor Wayne Anthony from Fernwood Publishing.
We're doing this again. This has been many times, Jim. Jim is the most published author for Fernwood. Both personally and professionally, Jim and I have a long history. We started doing stuff together in 1983, and we published his first book 30 years ago. And this is now number 15. So, from everybody at Fernwood, I'm going to say, I can say that we are really proud and honored to publish this book. We think it's an important book. I think one of the things I really liked about working on this book with Jim is the way he helps us understand how changing individual lives and changing society are completely linked together. And so, I want to thank you from Fernwood for bringing us the book and trusting us to publish this book, and for your loyalty to Fernwood over all the years. I also want to say thanks to McNally Robinson and John. We also have to go back a long ways. We've been doing book launches here at McNally for I can't remember how long. And I think McNally Robinson is a really important institution in Winnipeg. I can't say enough about McNally Robinson over the years. They've been so supportive of local authors and a local publisher like Fernwood. We really do owe a huge debt, and all of us, to McNally Robinson. I also want to thank the Manitoba Research Alliance. This is now, I don't know, probably 10 books that Fernwood has been involved with them, the research that they do. We're really grateful for the support that they gave us in being able to publish books from the research that they do. And finally, and I've said this, I think, at every of the 15 launches that I've done with Jim Silver, it's an absolute pleasure to work with Jim on a book. It makes being a publisher really easy. And not just easy, but it feels great. Working with Jim is an education. I always learn something. And we have great conversations and we end up with great books, and this is another great book. So with that, everyone, please welcome Jim Silver.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm going to start with a couple of thank yous. First of all, to Wayne in particular, as he said, we've been working together for a long time, 40 years or more. I hate to say that, but it's true. We started, I think, with the old Socialist Education Center that we ran out of the University of Winnipeg for a number of years. Many classes were organized in the fall term and the winter term. We had hundreds of people attend those socialist-oriented classes over a number of years. I think that was a really good project. Then in 1996, 97, Wayne and I and the late Errol Black founded the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Manitoba branch. And that continues to be a particularly strong organization. And Wayne has played a very important role in the CCPA Manitoba over all those years. I've just retired from CCPA and the Manitoba Research Alliance as of a couple of weeks ago, but Wayne thankfully carries on. And of course, Wayne and I, as he said, have worked together for many years, 30 years. I hadn't realized it was 30 years, but 30 years in working on various books together, and that certainly has been a pleasure. And I could say that Fernwood is a very important publisher. They're a small Canadian publisher, Canadian authors, Canadian issues, particularly in these times, that's really important and valuable. Very briefly, I also want to thank Fran Taylor, who is sitting back over there, and who is, as far as I know, the most knowledgeable person in Manitoba when it comes to adult basic education. And she and I have been working together over the last 2.5, 3 years, something like that, reaching out to various organizations in Winnipeg, trying to make them aware of adult basic education, and lobbying the provincial government. I think we really established an ongoing presence at the Ledge in recent years, with a fair amount of success, I would say. So for example, in this year's provincial budget, adult basic education got an additional $2.5 million, which on a $21 million budget, that is, I think, significant. So always happy to work with them. Fran and I actually are running an advocacy workshop tomorrow morning, I think it is. So we continue to work together, and I really enjoy that. So thanks, Fran. Thanks to the Manitoba Research Alliance, which has funded much of the research that goes into this book, and to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which has published the various predecessors papers that I've published on adult basic education leading up to the book. And thanks, family, finally, to those of you who are here. My family, some of my family here in the front row and back there as well in various places. I appreciate that. Guys, some of the guys from my book club who we've been in a book club for 25 years and we've known each other for 65 years, which is kind of amazing, I think, and quite wonderful. And many of the rest of you, friends and people that I've worked with on various projects in various ways over the years, so I'm really grateful to you for coming out tonight. And it is my very great pleasure to introduce you to the person whose story starts the book. The book starts with Asia's story. And Asia is Asia Oliver, and she is here tonight to tell you about what adult basic education has meant to her and to her family. So very happy to welcome Asia.
My name? Okay, that works. My voice is very low, so I'm glad we have a mic. So Ani Buju, Wake Kishiko Kwe, Additional Kaja de Dodem. Miigwech, Manitou, Minogisha. So I introduced myself in my language. I'm Anishinaabe on my mom's side, and we come from Penangutang First Nations. And on my deadly auntie Val's side, we're Red River Métis, and we come from St. Adolphe. So I'll just start a little bit about my childhood. I grew up. It wasn't easy. It was very challenging experience. You know, complex poverty, and just direct impacts of colonialism. You know, systemic racism, addiction, many forms of the direct impacts of colonization. I became a mom at 17, so I was a young mom, and you know, education wasn't my priority. You know, being a mom was my priority, so I gave my everything into that role. And you know, my life up until that time and after that time included being on social assistance. When I turned 18, I was on social assistance and being a single young mom, you know, just trying to survive and you know, provide for my daughter and then my children who came afterwards. And then fast forward 4 kids later, I was you know, trying to figure out what my next step was, and I was offered a place to live in the Lord Selkirk Park Developments, also known as the D. People may know it's a low-income housing project on Dufferin and King. And when I was given this opportunity, I thought, oh my gosh, the D, like, I don't know if I want to live there, you know. From what I understood, like, and from what I knew, it had a pretty rough reputation, but I really didn't have a choice, so I moved there. And I wasn't really aware of all the positive changes that were happening in Lord Selkirk Park at that time. So I moved in, and my youngest, he was about 6 or 7. He's here in the audience with the bright red sweater. You know, I was thinking, like, what am I gonna do with my life? Like, my kids are growing up and I don't wanna be on social assistance. Like, I have to do something. And on my way to drop them off at school at David Livingston, I saw this sign that said Kakiao Adult Learning Center or something. And I thought, oh, I wonder what that is. So I decided to check it out. And you know, it's inside Turtle Island Neighborhood Center. I walked in, and before I knew it, I was signed up for school and taking classes. So that was really exciting because it was allowed me to take that step that I needed to become independent and to, you know, get off of social assistance, and that was my goal. So once I started, you know, going to classes, I took a course called Current Topics. It's a grade 12 course. And we were learning about residential school. We were learning about colonization, 60 scoop, you know, overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the system, incarceration. And at that point, I didn't even know that my mom went to day school. Like, she never talked about it. I didn't know my brother went to residential school. He was in the last residential school that was closed in Saskatchewan in the 90s. I didn't know my family was, you know, taken in the 60 scoop. I didn't know any of that. And then so I started making phone calls. I called my mom, you know, I started, you know, investigating, like, you know, what happened. And then I started learning about the impacts of colonialism. And then that's when I had my aha moment. Me and Jim talk about that aha moment. And I thought, okay, now it makes sense. You know, now it makes sense why I grew up the way I did. Now it makes sense why we experience these things. And I thought to myself, this, like growing up in poverty, addiction, systemic racism, you know, having family members doing long periods of time in, you know, in jail, in prison, I was like, this has to stop. You know, I have 4 children. And that's when I decided that I was gonna stop that intergenerational trauma, that perpetuating cycle, and start intergenerational healing. And we've been going strong ever since. So I'm thankful that I took that course where I began to learn those things about who I was and about my people. So there was one point where you know, something happened to me and I just thought, like, I didn't want to go to school. This was before I graduated. I experienced something that just wasn't, you know, that really set me back. And I stayed home. I had my curtains closed. I shut the world out. And then like a few days later, maybe a week later, I hear a knock at the door and I'm like, well, who's that? My kids are at school. Like, what's going on? And so I'm like peeking, and it's my teachers from school, from Kakiao, Krista and Merle, and they're knocking at my door and I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? So I open it and they're like, where are you? Like, what, are you okay? Like, what's going on? You haven't been to school in a week. We're worried about you. And I thought, like, wow, you know, like that really meant so much to me. And Jim, you mentioned it in your book about, you know, giving so much thanks to the educators in the adult education system, because they really do go like beyond to help their students succeed. And I experienced that as well. So they're like, come on, get to school, like whatever we gotta do, let's figure it out. But you know, we're here, we'll support you, whatever you need. And so I did, I went back and then I graduated. So I graduated in 2017. I think I was like 33 years old or something, yeah. And so I graduated, but before I graduated, Jim came to the school with a group of students from urban and inner city studies, and we did a sharing circle, and that's the first time we met. And after the sharing, like I shared a little bit about my past and you know how I grew up, and then after the sharing circle, Jim came and asked if, you know, I'm interested in university, and I thought, I'm just trying to make it through high school, you know. I wasn't even, it didn't even, you know, I couldn't even think about university. I didn't even really think that that was something that I would be able to accomplish. But once that idea was presented to me, you know, it sparked interest, and I thought, yeah, like I can go to university, why not, you know? So as soon as I graduated from Kakiao, they hired me immediately. I became the community support worker in the Adult Learning Center, which was like my very first like job, you know? And that's when it all began. I, you know, started working, they hired me. I started going to the University of Winnipeg, urban and inner city studies. And all, like during this whole time, you know, it's like, it sounds really pleasant and great, and it is, but I faced so many struggles during that time. You know, I'm raising kids, I'm on welfare, fighting with social assistance, advocating for myself why I want to go to school, you know, and fighting all of these battles, and just sometimes just wanting to give up. And you know, thankfully, you know, Jim presented the opportunity fund to me and said, hey, you can get funding. And I thought, like, okay, so again, I get up and I keep going, and then I completed the 2-year certificate, and yeah, I was a university student. So that's, you know, something that I'm very, very proud of. And since then, you know, when I walked through those doors of Kakiao, that's when the powerful transformation that Jim talks about, that's when it started happening in my life. And when people talk about, you know, the changes that are made because of people having the opportunity to get their education, you know, it's so important to provide these opportunities. And, you know, I don't know where I would be if I didn't walk through those doors of Kakiao, you know. So since then, since I graduated, went to university, finished my certificate, I've been working as a research assistant, education outreach worker, counselor, cultural and ceremony coordinator, community justice worker. And right now I work at Forensic Psychological Services. I'm a community integration manager, I'm a knowledge keeper. And that's really important to me, you know, sharing and learning about my culture and helping other people learn about who they are as Indigenous people, you know. And now I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, you know. My children are, you know, are on a good path. And my son couldn't make it tonight because he's at work and he's, you know, has this career that's amazing, and there's no more applying for social assistance in our house. Like, that is done, and we stopped that cycle. And now I think in closing, what I'll say is, you know, having the opportunity to experience adult education and graduate, for me personally, has created, you know, intergenerational change for my family. It's created intergenerational change, not change just for me, but for my children, you know, for my grandchildren, and for the generations to follow. Like, our lives have completely transformed and have completely changed for the better. And now we're living a good life, you know, and I'm so thankful for Kakiao Lamamako, thankful for adult education. And yeah, if anybody tells you that it doesn't work, tell them to come and talk to me. I just want to say very much to Jim. I'm super grateful for, you know, having met you and all the advocacy work that you do, your allyship with Indigenous people, all the work you do in the community, in the inner city, everywhere. So I just want to say, miigwech. Miigwech.
I don't think I really need to say anything more about adult basic education. That's what it's about. The title of the book is The Transformative Power of Adult Education. Asia, whose story opens the book, Asia has just told you about how it's transformed her life for the better and the lives of her kids as well. But I will say something about the book. Give an old professor a stage, and you know. So I'd start by saying that there's a lot of poverty in Winnipeg and in Manitoba, and there's a little bit of data in the book, in the early part of the book, about the poverty. So, for example, if you take all the federal constituencies in Canada, Winnipeg Centre has the highest rate of child poverty of any of them. And Churchill, I'm going to get the pronunciation not quite right, but Churchill Kawananuk Aski in our far north in Manitoba has the second highest rate of child poverty in Canada. Homelessness is growing. Data recently released about that. Food banks quite overwhelmed. Some food banks across the country saying They're not sure they can sustain their operations any longer, so great is the demand. More and more people are being left behind. The poverty is closely related to education. So studies done by the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy show that in the highest income neighborhoods in Winnipeg, 98% of young people graduate high school on time. In the lowest income neighborhoods in Winnipeg, 68% of young people graduate high school on time. A huge difference. For Indigenous youth graduate high school on time at a rate 30 percentage points lower than the population at large. Poverty and colonialism and racism produce poor educational outcomes, and those poor educational outcomes then produce more poverty, and we head down that reproducing cycle. Adult basic education can break that cycle. It broke the cycle for Asia and her kids. It breaks the cycle for many, many others. It is a particularly effective anti-poverty strategy. It also promotes reconciliation, which is a major issue for us here in Manitoba. So while young Indigenous people are graduating 30 percentage points below the average, Indigenous adults are coming back to adult basic education at a rate about 2.5 times their share of the population. So adult basic education matters for reconciliation. A teacher in the North who I've spent a lot of time talking with said to me that her program, the Kelsey Learning Center, is the boots on the ground for reconciliation. And I think that's true. A wonderful anti-poverty program, a wonderful means of promoting reconciliation. Short bit about the book. Two of the chapters actually are historical. In the pre-Second World War period, many adult education programs worked specifically with working class people who were poor and were marginalized, worked in a way that was closely connected with community economic development, effective programming opposed by business, which is a theme that runs throughout the book. The establishment opposes education for adults who are poor and marginalized. So a fishing executive in the 1920s in Atlantic Canada expressed his opposition to educating working class people by saying, an educated fisherman is a dangerous man. That theme runs, I think, in various ways throughout history and runs throughout the book. Another historical chapter focuses on Manitoba in particular, and this part I don't think very much has been written about before. In the 1980s, there were a handful of small, largely voluntary literacy programs in Winnipeg. They were financially fragile. The people who were working in them were local, progressive activists, many of whom working as volunteers, some of them being paid, but paid, at a very, very low rate. They were meeting at that time a huge need because of the poverty that existed then and the racism and colonialism that existed then as it continues to do to this day. So for example, a program run by Frontier College called Beat the Street was operating in the inner city in Winnipeg. And one of their guys speaking, one of the Beat the Street guys, speaking to the 1989 Manitoba Task Force on Adult Literacy, said, the school system works. It works for about 75% of the people. It's the 25% that we get that it simply doesn't work for. And that 25%, 25% continues to be the case. Round about 25% of young people are not graduating high school on time, year after year after year after year after year. Brenda Garner, who is one of the pioneers of adult education in this province, told me about working for Frontier College, going into rural communities, meeting with women to teach literacy, but they couldn't tell their husbands or their partners what they were doing, so they told them that they're going to share recipes. Again, people who are in charge, people who have power, don't want low-income adults to be educated. Education is powerful. Today, we have here in Manitoba a very good system, despite the fact that it's been seriously underfunded for the last 30 years, last 20 years, the last 2 decades since 2003 in particular. We're starting to catch up now. The current provincial government is investing in adult basic education, the $2.5 million this year that I mentioned earlier. They're not going to be rid of Fran and me. We're going to keep pounding on their door because we need to double the amount of funding that goes into adult basic education. There's a chapter in the book that's based largely on interviews with adult learners and interviews with teachers and directors of adult learning centers. One of the teachers said to me a phrase that I like very much. She said, so many of our students come to us broken and defeated and so down on themselves. They're people who have experienced poverty and colonialism and racism. And many teachers have said to me, the hardest part, the most difficult part is walking through that door for the first time. To work up the courage, to take on the enormous challenge of going back to school when you're 33 years old. But once in the program, adults who go back to earn their mature high school diploma, see their self-esteem grow, their self-confidence grows, they begin to develop a sense of optimism about future, about what might be possible for them. Their lives are transformed. The transformative power of adult basic education. I think the chapter is a good one in describing that. Maybe even better is the film made by Kevin Nicol, and I think Kevin is here somewhere, back in the corner there. So Kevin is himself an adult educator. He is an experienced filmmaker. He's an amazing guy. He recently published a book published by University of Manitoba Press on the Winnipeg Folk Festival, which is a very, very good book if you're interested. But Kevin did a film. It was funded by the Manitoba Research Alliance. He traveled all around the province. He spoke to adult learners across the province and to some teachers as well. And really, in that film, you see the transformative power of adult education. You see it as he's talking with these people who are themselves adult learners and adult teachers. So if you have the time, check it out. Kevin Nicol, Nikkel, Nikkel. So Google Kevin Nicol, Live and Learn. It's a powerful film. It's only 17 minutes long. So there is this chapter based on interviews with adult learners and teachers. I think it's a good one. Even better is Kevin's film. So I encourage you to take a look at that. We also did a cost-benefit study. We did that to try to persuade the provincial government that they ought to invest more in adult basic education. They like to see that the money that they're putting in produces some financial benefit. So we worked with Probe Research, Mary Agnes Welch. I don't know if Mary Agnes is here, I haven't seen her. And we worked also with Niall Harney from CCPA Manitoba, who's back there, the economist at CCPA Manitoba. What we did was to pick 5 adult learning centers in Manitoba. The Seven Oaks Adult Learning Center, where Fran at that time was the director. Urban Circle Training Center on Selkirk Avenue, which is an all Indigenous program. The Adult Learning Center in Altona. 2 adult learning centers working together in Turtle Mountain, in Killarney and Voice Bay. And the 5th one was in Nepal, the Kelsey Learning Center. We asked, and there were, from those 5 adult learning centers, we identified people who had graduated 2, 3, 4, and 5 years before. We asked them these 3 questions. Are you happier now that you've graduated than you were before you started at the Adult Learning Center? Do you think your kids have benefited from your going to the Adult Learning Center? And do you believe that you're on your way to a better life? 90% said yes to each of those 3 questions. That's transformation. The survey that we did basically said to the graduates from these 5 adult learning centers, what were you doing before you started at the Adult Learning Center? What are you doing now that you have graduated? And very, very simply, what we found is that if you add together the number of those graduates who were on EIA, were on welfare when they started and have moved off, so the province is saving money, not having to pay EIA payments to those people. Add that together with the number of people who are now employed full-time, so the province is earning income tax. Those 2 things added together, adult basic education pays for itself over 10 years. It's not only a wonderful program, it's a cost-effective program. And that's a very conservative estimate because it doesn't take into account the increased incomes of the graduates, which of course will ripple through the communities where they live and work, producing multiplier effects. It doesn't take into account what the literature says about the gains in healthcare and criminal justice. The higher your level of education, the healthier you're likely to be and the less likely you're to get in trouble with the law. We found of the 292 respondents to this survey, 243 of them are working part-time or full-time or are taking further education. 243 out of the 292, 5 in every 6. It's really quite remarkable results. So all of which simply to say that adult basic education changes people's lives, transforms their lives, and it does so in a cost-effective manner. So, let's do it. So part of what I argue in the final chapter is that we ought to be radically reimagining what education is. If you ask people what education is, the likelihood is that they'll say education is K-12 for kids and young people, and it's post-secondary education, university and community colleges. Adult basic education is an afterthought. It's the poor cousin. It's not even thought about. You can see that in the data. I have a table in one of the chapters. The per capita, the per student amount paid by the province for K-12 is $14,700. On average, each student $14,700. The University of Manitoba on average $13,300. Adult basic education on average $2,400. So K-12 on a per student basis, it's 6 times as much money as does adult basic education. just further evidence of the extent to which adult education is marginalized. And I argue we really ought to reimagine education to say education includes adult basic education, not to be valued the same and not to be funded the same. So I close the book with something that was written 35 years ago in the 1989 Manitoba Task Force on Adult Literacy, right at the very, very end. More than 35 years ago, the Manitoba Task Force on Adult Literacy included the important observation that, quote, relative to the costs of other human services, the social investment required for a comprehensive literacy initiative in Manitoba is modest. Its potential returns in economic, human, and social terms are immense. And I think that is the case. To go back to the beginning of what I said, we've got lots of poverty here. Adult basic education is an effective anti-poverty strategy. The province ought to continue. The province has begun to invest more in adult basic education. We're very, very happy about that. It ought to continue to invest because it works. It's very effective. It's transformative. Well, thank you very much. I'd be happy to try to respond to questions or comments that you may have.
Now, were there any questions at all from the audience? Yes.
Thank you, Jim. I don't disagree with what your message is. There needs to be a lot more adult education for those who haven't made it through high school. But I'm wondering, do you think if there was more tutoring in high school for struggling learners, would there be fewer? There would still be some, of course, but would there be fewer who wouldn't make it through high school and therefore need to access adult education?
Yes, I do. So in the PAW, Tara Manich, formerly the director of the Kelsey Learning Center and now vice president at UCN, she got some money to be able to hire tutors and support workers for young people in grade 12 that kind of wraparound supports to make sure that they're getting lunch, to make sure that they're getting their homework done, that they've got a place to sleep, that somebody's encouraging them and believes in them. And Tara tells me that this year the graduation rate is just going through the roof. So there's some tangible evidence in support of the fact that more supports for kids in high school would mean more graduates and less need for adult basic education, although that's not to diminish the importance of adult basic education.
Jim, how long does it take for a student who doesn't graduate from high school, who drops out? What's the average number of years until they enter an adult learning environment?
Oh, it's all over the place. The last few years, what we've been experiencing is that young people are either coming close to graduating high school, or they are graduating high school, but they don't have credits that they need to go into nursing or whatever the case might be. Or they were in high school, but they found the large size of the building and the classes intimidating and difficult. Those people increasingly are coming back to adult learning centers to finish off their grade 12 or to get their science credits so they can go into healthcare. But other people are coming back, like Asia, when she's 33 years old and is on welfare and says, you know, I'm not even remotely happy with the way my life is going. I've got to make a change. I've got to do something different. So lots of people are in their 20s and 30s and have kids. And there's a lot of people also who are grandparents, and they are going back not so much to get a job, but to show their grandchildren that it can be done, and to become a model for them. So it's really all over the place, different ages at which people go into adult basic education.
Jim, a couple comments very quickly and then my question. Seems to me that basic income and basic education would be a very nice combination that would deal with some of the poverty issues that you're talking about. And I also want to know, and I don't know how much is going on these days, but certainly the UFCW has been doing adult education for a long time. I was, 20, I don't know how many years ago, I was doing their health and safety course, but they also at the same time were doing other kinds of what I think you're calling basic education. And so I'm not sure who else is doing it aside from these other centers, but it seems to me that those kinds of organizations are important to support as well in terms of doing these kinds of things.
Do you mean union supported?
Yeah, so they were doing, they were, as far as I remember, that they were doing, literacy, they were doing math.
Yeah.
But for me, one of the fundamental questions in this, as somebody who has done work as an educator in health and safety for many years, is how things are taught.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what turns people off and stops people learning. If you have what Paul Freire calls the banking method, and just pouring knowledge into people's heads. So what's different, or is there any difference in the way that things are taught in the centers that you looked at compared to the traditional school systems? And what is there for those traditional school systems then to learn about how to keep people in school and really how to do education in an effective way?
Well, I think the traditional public school system is wonderful. It's one of the great inventions of the 20th century. And the teachers there most of them are fabulous. The educational problems don't lie within the walls of the schoolhouse. In my view, they lie outside the walls of the schoolhouse. But as to the point that you're raising, my experience is that teachers in adult learning centers work one-on-one in a highly flexible way, meeting adults where they're at, providing them with lots and lots of encouragement, saying to them when they're overwhelmed and they have to quit, okay, but you're welcome back whenever you're ready to come back. They go and, as Asia said, they go and knock on people's doors when they don't come to school. There's a massive dedication there. I don't think every teacher in the public school system would be a good fit in adult basic education. It's different. People come to an adult learning center carrying a very heavy load on their shoulders. They have lived difficult lives, lots of challenges. And you've got to be a teacher who can work with adults dealing with those kinds of circumstances. I really admire the teachers in adult basic education. I think they're fabulous. And by the way, one of the interesting things is that there's a whole bunch of teachers in adult basic education programs who are being paid less than what they ought to be paid based on their credentials. Fran and I have been advocating that they be paid at the rate that they ought to be paid. And what we understand is that 1.7 of the 2.5 additional $1 million is going to go to bringing all of their incomes up to where they ought to be. So.
Jim, thanks for shining the spotlight on this important segment of our educational enterprise. Are there any data on completion rates, people starting and people finishing adult basic education programs?
That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer. I don't know if those data are collected. If they are, I'm not aware of them. What I do know is that since 2003, just under 25,000 adults have graduated with their mature high school diploma. And on average, over that period since 2003, 1,150 plus adults are graduating each year with their mature high school diploma. So that's a lot. Some people come back and finish their requirements in a year. Other people may take 6 years, 7 years. Teachers are very flexible in working in that way. But yours is a very good question, and I'm afraid I can't specifically answer it.
I want to thank you for advocating and producing results for the teachers to have equity in the wages that they earn. So 1.7 is going to bring the teaching payment system up to where it should be. And you said this 2.5 has been allocated. In the years going forward, if we have an investment of 2.5 million, now that the teachers' salaries are on equity, what would you see as the major things that we as a community need to support the government to invest in? What are the programs and what aspects need to be strengthened?
Well, this year, 1.7, we are told, is going to bring up the salaries of those teachers who are now being underpaid. Fran and I recommended that the remainder of the money not be allocated on a percentage basis. That is, everybody gets 5% or whatever, but rather that the government ought to work with the Adult Secondary Education Council to identify those places where we get the biggest bang for our buck. So one of the things we recommended, for example, is at Urban Circle Training Center, which is a brilliant adult learning program, all Indigenous. They have an additional classroom where they could run the mature high school diploma program, but they don't have enough money to hire a teacher. So we said, look, there you can add 25 people a year to the numbers of graduates by investing in the price of one teacher, properly paid teacher. So it's things like that. And in one of the papers I did a few years ago, I asked teachers across the province, how much additional money do you need and what would you do with it? And there were different answers from different adult learning centers because everybody's a little bit different from everybody else. Many of them said they would hire additional teaching staff. Some of them said, we're overwhelmed with students, we don't have enough space, we'd like to be able to rent additional space. So I think the method that ought to be used by the government is to go to all of the adult learning centers across the province and say, how much money do you need? What would you put it into? And then evaluate what the teachers there are telling them, because they know best what they need, and go from there. Invest where it is most needed and going to produce the highest number of graduates.
We have time for one more question, which is just over here.
Thanks very much. Is it more that you see just room for improvement, or have you seen actual examples of two-eyed seeing with Indigenous and non-Indigenous methodologies actually uniting and people getting the best from both?
Well, some programs like Urban Circle are really heavily steeped in Indigenous cultures. So when you go to do the mature high school diploma at Urban Circle, that's an all Indigenous program. You're really going to come out of there knowing who you are as an Indigenous person. That is a central part of the program, and it works very effectively. What Asia said exemplifies that. Kind of like an aha moment. I get it now. I understand something about colonialism and residential schools and so on. Other adult learning centers, almost every adult learning center in the province has Indigenous learners there. A lot of them. Some are better than others in using Indigenous cultures. That would be one area where some adult learning centers could use some improvement. But I was, day before yesterday, I was at a place called the Adult Education Center on North Main. They have 600 registrations a year these days, and they have a very high proportion of Indigenous learners. The director of the program is an Indigenous woman. She's fabulous. They use Indigenous culture, to a considerable extent, I would say. So I would say it varies, but that is an important part of producing success for Indigenous adults, many of whom, especially here in Winnipeg, are in a situation that Asia was. They don't know anything about their history, about colonialism, about the residential schools. And once they find that out, they say, oh man, now I get it. That's what happened. That's why my family's so messed up. That's why we're having so many problems. And it becomes an aha moment when you say, okay, I get it now. It's not me. It's not that I'm stupid. It's the whole system that has disadvantaged our people. Now I'm gonna forge ahead.
Do you have any closing comments, Jim, or would you like me to just go over procedure?
Thank you, everyone.
So I don't have much more to add. We will be moving along to the signing portion of the evening in just a moment. So Jim will take a place behind this table. There'll be one beautiful moment of chaos while everybody gets in line approximately down that aisle. If the line is looking intimidating, please feel free to just rest in place and join the line when it's a little more comfortable. We're so very grateful to everybody who came out tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on this oddly beautiful evening. Thank you so much to Asia Oliver for telling the story of her own journey, to Wayne for introducing Jim, to everybody at Fernwood for publishing this and so many other exceptional books, and of course, to Jim Silver. Thank you all for coming tonight. Have a wonderful evening.